나온저 Lama Chöpa. 나온저 안젤레 고위 동안에 탈제 아니 탈바다 산지 고방 토발라 너 초사 집장지 오래선 디바장세야 된가 디바 사샤바디게 바 장세의 매바스 네 게비릭 아니 산지 고방 토발라 초 가르가르 싸고 곰가네 그스게고 차산파 싸고레스게고 초사 집장세야디 초사 집장지 오래선 되네 제발에 되네 나 저기 탈바다 탐지기 먹고도 고바도 두고레스 자다 초사 집장 제단 delada 지다 망보예배 나네다 아주 대 Lama Chöpa 라면나죠 라마다 이담 상예 뭐 예매도 따지네 뒤라네 나죠 라미 토냐는 아주게 초사 집장 제야디 아니 도시 Lama Chöpa단 제외 토네 도시 디고를 마시고 그러다도
Good evening. In order to attain a state freed of all suffering and to progress further even to attain full enlightenment, vast stores of merit as well as wisdom need to be accumulated, as well as previously accumulated negativities need to be purified. So there are many techniques that are presented for how to accumulate merit and wisdom and how to purify negativities. And this practice of Lama Chöpa is a particularly skillful method that focuses on, through the practice of Guru Yoga, where one meditates on the Lama, Yidam and Buddha as being indivisible in nature, and within the context of the entire merit field, one engages then in practices of both accumulation and purification.
다 초사 집장세야들라 당한주 초사반이 디베드 셔를 장르고르바다 미시 다 고쇼도 개와가제 초사반이 디베드 셔를 파 라슈게 장르고르바 디네 잠베나가 차와다 장완이나 이제 차와데 가제 첨부수베나 장와데 메와 차 장모데 메와 차로 디나시한도 초가제 사토베네 안디제게 고 디베드 세디 마 장르고르바
Something to be aware of is, whilst we talk about on one hand accumulation of merit and wisdom, and on the other about the purification of negativities, and whilst one may sometimes focus on one or the other, they are intricately entwined in that, as to the extent that one accumulates merit, so too one is also purifying negativities. So for example, as much as one turns up the temperature, the cold dissipates.
다 초사에 대한 초계 체화단 중화에 대한 체충세시대 조 군노라라리고 군노 지상은 저기 군노대 안내지게 변화하는 저기 칼라지 션지리아 진바치 심전지리아 칼라시 때문에 군노 가야면 맞죠 그런리아 콜리아 칼라시 때와서 제샤베네 지 칼라지 개화로 사디세고 디나 개화 또 충화 체거로 봐. 난 되는 안에 개화 치마 가서 탈비고 봐 토백이도 탈바도니 선비군에 라제 아니 지금 니 제바이나 근데 타바도기 두세거래 다디나지 군노 장주심 유군에 라제 언델이야 안도스전 제바이나 다 타바침비 상지고 봐도 규체거래 지난데 군노라야 군노 장주심 유군에 라제 초가제 사회네 초디 개체와 체거래 군노 장주심 군노 말랑바지 초사반에 저 초디게 중화를 세고 지자 군노를 라리고 그래서디지
Whether a particular act of accumulation or purification is of minor strength, moderate or significant strength depends not primarily on the act itself, but on the motivating intention. This is the crucial element of an act to determine its strength. So, for example, quite regularly, many people often quite regularly give food to animals. So if they're doing it in a thoughtless way, throwing away leftovers, or just habitually giving, perhaps feeding a pet, merit will be accumulated, but not much. Whereas if it is that same food, that same act of offering is being made, but a motivation has been generated that through this merit may I achieve a good rebirth in my next life so as to continue my spiritual development. Or through this merit may I attain liberation from suffering in its entirety, or through this merit may I become a Buddha for the sake of others. In dependence on on whichever of those motivations, a vastly different amount of merit will be accumulated. So therefore motivation is crucial.
semjen chikane semjen 탐지기 도나 semjen 탐지기 디기 주하다 semjen 탐지기 동화단 자야 제가 semjen 탐지 대화다 덴바다 니지기 semjen 탐지 동화단 자화다 니지기 제가 다 콘솔이야 semjen 탐지기 대화다 디기 주비야다 동화세야 한 탑람 약쇼도 가르쳐 산지고 말해 제장이 산지고 봐 토바이네 한 콘솔이야 판도 개치 뭐지 투서래 디니 인사 내 산지고 봐 토바 지긴 셈비기 꿀로 디네 semjen 탐지기 도나 삼다제 semjen 탐지기 동화세야다 semjen 탐지기 디기 주비야기 디 돈다기 아니 꾸노 산이 산요고마 토바지기 디 돈다랑이 짐바탄 구여서야 돼 아니 발바주고서 디네 삼다와인자 꾸노 semjen 탐지기 돈다 삼다와인자 다 개와디 semjen 탐지기를 미봐야지 개와 자신 뭐 자도 김선디네와.
Amongst the varying motivations that one can generate, bodhicitta is the supreme motivation. And this is because whilst the person who's offering under the influence of bodhicitta is making this food offering to only a handful of beings, a small number of beings, they are doing it with the motivation to benefit all sentient beings, not just the few before them, but all beings without exception. So whilst just a handful are being directly benefited, the motivation is far more expansive, and thereby all beings will be indirectly benefited through this virtue that's accumulated, because the motivation is for the offerer of the food to attain the supreme goal, the goal of enlightenment. And not just for their own good, but so that they can lead each and every single sentient being without exception to attain their own state of enlightenment.
Di toba na nge semjen 탐지기 디기 주야도 동아세 투구도 대인장 산jo 고바 토고디 디 토베가 돈달라 니델야 아니 짐바땅이 선배있습니다. 와자 또 짐바땅사데 찌글마도 찌기 오므로 이나 꾸노데 semjen 탐지기 돈다 삼다샤 와자 다 겨와제 첨사고레세지.
I want to emphasize this point because it really is important that when one is practicing generosity to a single being, one is directly benefiting just that one being. But if one has generated bodhicitta, while still that one being is being directly benefited, because the motivation is so vast, all beings are indirectly being benefited because the merit that is accumulated through offering food to this one being is motivated so that one can become a Buddha in order to lead each and every being, without exception, to enlightenment.
안디네게 군로 semjen 탐지게 삼다베나 아니 개와 개체 싸고베디 베나 저기 지팀바 세베네 밀리아 아니 미지 베나 강아 뭐부터 차상리에 펜버도 직주로고 제오도 선배 삼로 쉬어베나 군로 데니 쉬어베나 군로 디 긴제네 아니 젠리아 로고 제기 탑람들 베주 지고로 와베네 다 가시게다 다 소소기원의 잔다데 제가 갈래 하고라 삼되겠네 소소기 지게 야보라 쉐베네 셴리아 로고시라 제마도와다 안 제마도와 몽부용고로 와다 베네 데네 자당 점리나리아 통쇼스 주바 데네게 다 지게 내얌 젠다 안 지게 지강아 체류 갑이야 백강 존이 가시오네 소소 소로 다시 되는 말 로봇 제조가 망고여로 봐. 디서 가서 군노여로 군노 디서레 로봇 지기 콘솔 로봇 제고도 마진 답면도 선백 군노여 봐서 군노게 삼는 디기 슈긴기 아니 뭐서 라다진 로봇 제투투여로 데네자 semjen 탐지기 펜버 주보다 semjen 동아 세야 된다. 이 산요고마 토바 지기 스 군노지 여와서 니 군노데까지 슈체 여베네. 아니 마오반의 셴리아 판도 주야다. 니 누가 채용 거로 봐.
So So hopefully it's clear what makes the motivation of bodhicitta so vast what makes the accumulation of merit from an act motivated by bodhicitta so vast and extensive is because of how vast and extensive the motivation is. We've seen something similar, although the motivation wasn't necessarily one of bodhicitta, but probably focused just on this life in the last couple of years, where there have been people really focused on bringing an end to the suffering that's brought to this in this world by the pandemic. And they worked incredibly hard for months at end, working around the clock, day after day after day, so that they could find a solution to this pandemic, and thereby be able to alleviate the suffering of vast numbers of beings. So what we would have seen there with those scientists and others, their motivation wasn't just about those that they could observe directly before them, but really for society or the entire humanity. And therefore, they worked incredibly hard, but with a vast motivation. And this would have had an impact on the extensiveness of the merit accumulated.
당한주 개와 사교를 해야 돼. 디부 사교를 해야 돼. 아니 가와 요래서 당한주게 디파세야 돼. 가와 요래서. 아니 개와세야 돼. 가와 요래서 선배나 한주 수부디된도 요래서는 될래요 말다. 가와 요래서 셈기된도 용거를. 개와 가제사나 개와기 디기 뭐바는 디부주의 뉴바디 셈기된도 용거래. 디부 가제사나 뭐바나 강한 동안요에게 뉴바디 게 뉴바디 셈기된도 리고래. 저 셈기된도 용거. 당한주 개와 가제사베나다 디부 가제사베나 디바세야 가와 요래서 셈기된도 요래. 바지 뉴바디. 다 디바세야 돼 가와 개와세야 돼 가로 셈기된도 용거래. 진짜 셈기된도 요래. 진짜 셈기된도 요바서 빼는 안 주기 셈기된도 요바인자 당한주 셈디 개위초 삼까지 망았다 땅투베네 곧네 개와 망아서가 디 아니 디비초디 많이 울던 거로.
If we ask ourselves, so this virtue that we accumulate, as well as the non-virtue we've accumulated, where is this to be found? It's not on our body, but where it is on our mind, on our consciousness. So the potency of both the virtue and non-virtue that we have accumulated, this is to be found on our consciousness. The greater the virtue we've accumulated, this serves to, the greater the potency of the virtue that we've accumulated, this serves to overwhelm and thereby proportionately weaken our non-virtue that we have previously accumulated.
lomba chade yorwa, shugudi lomba yorwa, da shugudi lomba de gawa shugudi li yorwa. Chisan da digba na shindi shugudi lomba de che, shugudi nga zo sem na che, da digba de shugudi na lomba de che. Chisan lomba de shugudi lomba de pa du shinde nimal kam shabana, nimal gaze shug tsawara gaze che na shugudi su kambu kam yodu ko rangshingi ba lomba de nyur rugorwa. Di na shire, nga zo sem di de tendo gewegi nyuba dia che ane chige dibasana digi nyubaden semitende shagore ono gewasabana di nyubaden semitende shagore tene shasa semde shugud najinza ta jwe shukchene rashin ko lomba chudi kamdudo tene ane ko lomba shukchene rashin gi men ko lomba ma je de lomba je gedina lomba je de ran tene sheishoje chagor andi najin 상아주 셈미텐데 개와사고랬을 아주 셈기야 라마레 이치제다 대바제야 자주 셈콤이야 셴레 니제콤이야 상아주 셈데 개위초 같이 망아사 투베 삼투베이나 셈디 아니 개위초 같이 망아사 삼투베이나 디팅기 디텐레 셈미 뉴벌이야 개위 삼로디 뉴버디 바차데 슈처르서 두고래 진짜 디인자 그 디비기 삼로 바차디바 마 뉴벌마 손 춘쇼로 슈 깜바나지 춘주고래 지상아 저기 개화사 디베장세 디레 개화사서 삼로나네 개위 삼로까지 망아 땅 투베이네 개화사고래 데레 디베장으로 거래 디바디 마 춘쇼고래.
Give an illustration to make this, hopefully make this a little clear. So if you take a piece of paper and you soak it in some water. We pull it out of the water and it's thoroughly wet. Where is the water? It's in the paper. So here we can say the mind we can liken to the piece of paper, and the water that pervades this piece of paper we can liken to non-virtue. So where is the non-virtue to be found? Within the mind. Then sun rays, or rays of light, land on the piece of paper and it starts to dry. So the paper is still there, but its moisture is starting to evaporate. So in the analogy, the paper is the mind, the moisture is the non-virtue, and the rays of light, this is likened to virtue. As the sun gets hotter, the piece of paper becomes ever drier. And whether, in the analogy, the sun or the virtue is coming from a source of acts of generosity, acts of ethical restraint or patience, or bodhicitta or wisdom, whatever source of that virtue is, the result is similar in that it serves to make the consciousness ever purer of the stains of non-virtue. But likewise, whilst this paper is drying out, should it slip back into the water, it once again will be soaked thoroughly and will once again require the application of light to start to dry it out.
차사와 최고 부와디 그생이만 차사래 다디는 마가슨 디버샤야다 아니 지게 개발의 지소이나 이제 추유고로 고도 소전 소와 대비야 아니 양알입니다와 아니 슈소셔야 돼 안소와 대비야 아니 개발의 지소이라지 안디고마 다 시엔 디나네다 당보는 아주 디나네다 디버샤야 디고마 쉬야래.
Within the practice of Lama Chöpa, we've generated the merit fields as well as the motivations of bodhicitta and the wisdom realizing emptiness, and having recalled the Lama and his tremendous qualities and kindness, we've engaged in acts of accumulation and purification as expressed in the seven limb prayer. So if we looked at the first two of the seven limbs, that of accumulation and purification, and on page 7 we now come to confession, the 38th verse, and this will be followed by rejoicing, requesting to teach, requesting to remain, and dedication of merit. The 38th verse. Before those having great compassion, I confess with regret and vow never to commit again whatever non-virtuous actions I have done since beginningless time, cause others to do, or in which I have rejoiced.
가르스는 가지고 땡진 제와 중화에 시키시오라. 저는 디버 영화에 대한 유단 겐지를 되네. 근데 디버디 사고를 가지고 저는 되샤기야다 콘도기야다 신헬이야 추주제 되네를 되네 가지고 뇽몽베 될을 되네 가지고 디버 사고를 와. 디버 영화에 유단 겐지를 되네. 레오면 유단 겐 매바지라 디버 사야를 가요 말해. 저는 유단 겐 매바지를 디버 사바이나 사야 여바이나 디버 매바서야 말 매바서 투야 말해. 지난 디보 코론 기에 되어야 유나긴 현실에 되네 연구여바인자 디보 매바서야다 유나긴 현실에 되네 고 매바서 두고 샤두고 거래 지난 유나긴 현실에 되네 주바인자 고 매바서야다 유나긴 현실에 되네 매바서 두고 거래 지로 지난
The term confession, the meaning of confession is to destroy or eliminate non-virtue. Non-virtue, as mentioned in the previous segments, is to be found or is stored on our mind. So the act of confession serves to destroy or eliminate, eradicate the non-virtue on our continuum. Non-virtue didn't just magically appear on our continuum, but came about independence on causes. It was accumulated independence on causes. And what were those causes? Our afflictions. Minds, such as anger, attachment, ignorance, and so forth. Independence on those afflictions, we accumulated non-virtue on our continuum. If the non-virtue was accumulated in a way that was not dependent on causes, they couldn't be eradicated. They would have always been there, never be able to be removed. But because they came about independent on causes, again, namely the afflictions, they can be eradicated. And the method for eradicating them is similar in a sense to how they're accumulated. They're accumulated in dependence on causes, and they'll be eradicated in dependence on causes. There is no non-virtue, no matter how grave, that cannot be confessed. Or to not use the literal word, there is no virtue, no matter how grave, that cannot be eradicated. The causes, in dependence on which previously accumulated non-virtue are eradicated, are the four opponent powers. So the four opponent powers, they often listed in varying orders, but there's the power of reliance, the power of regret, the power of restraint, and the power of the antidote. So again, the power of regret, the power of reliance, the power of restraint, and the power of the antidote. The power of regret is, as the name states, it's regretting previously accumulated or previous negativities that one has engaged in. So one recalls previous negativities and generates regret for them. The power of reliance in our context of the Lama Chöpa practice is all the deities or the beings within the merit field. It's them that one is relying on. So this then is the second of the four, power of reliance. And furthermore, further reliances are the minds that we have already generated, such as refuge and bodhicitta. So these two serve as the opponent power to previously accumulated negativities within the power of reliance.
띵이 doblading an 저기 야랑ben 라고 두스전에 직대는 랑서로 사강마 직대지 랑서로와 댄스 제장도 디부샤야디 가르리 띵유스를 얘기 개뷰 소신 되길래 댄 아니 굴노 잔주sem나 굴노 되길래 댄제 맞아 디부샤야게 자와 제고로와 마지니라 굴노고 굴노 삼다 안데리아 유데리아 그 디부샤서 유 디들이야 샤고자 댄스 될래 댄네 맞아 디부샤야게 디부샤고 요바자 띵이 돕사디래.
Let's change the translation then, from power of reliance to power of the basis. So Genla there was illustrating the basis, a basis for when he's going to stand up in a little while, he'll push down on the cushion, and in dependence on that basis, he'll be able to stand easily. So what we rely on, or our basis, is our motivation, and that is refuge and bodhicitta.
나델라 안가지게 대지군노 자주심 삼다 안데 개뷰티게라 초신 삼다 안데니게 델라 대징이 디버체 노르셰 베사샤선 땡이 디버 결혼들이야 디버 샤긴스네 안 도시네 샤긴 삼제된 샤야들이야 아니 지게 아주게 메니다 용거래 내가 아주게 이게 돼야 용거래 안에 지게 안에 믹스만 돼야 용거래 다디 동화샤와 된 차세야 용거래 다마라 용거로 와들래 님버 군도 집도 없어야 되나.
So we looked at the power of regret, the power of the basis, and then the power of the antidote. So the power of the antidote now, this is any virtuous act, such as the recitation of mani mantras, or vajrasattva mantras, or meksemas, or doing prostrations. So this virtuous activity is the antidote and to the previous accumulated non-virtue.
돕세데 녀바 양자 모양이 돌아 다 친진의 자와기는 지금에 세베 domsem들이다 니 마음바나데네 균이 지금에 세베 domsem들이 될라 녀발라메도 돕세고.
And fourthly is the power of restraint, or the power of the promise, where one makes a promise or the commitment that one will restrain oneself from engaging in such non-virtues again.
나데네 자 남봉한 주길야 님복군도 집에 돕셔야 되다니 지금 예발라 노트제발라 노트임바 모신바 하고 봐이나 제만에 노트다 마제기 가서 개발 여러 와다 배당가서 칼라 수비네 칼라 지수디 qabla 노트 중반 어디 노트 중에 디제네 야고 민도스 노트 하고 봐이나 마음바네 노트디 마제기 그냥 개발 여러 와 가서 내가 노트 선배네 어디지네 내가디 다다 책임 민도스 노트 하고 봐이나 마음바네 내가 그냥 만나야 개발 여러 와 디나시 가서 디버 제바다 디버 제바 노트 제바 디버 사바다 하고 봐이나 마음바네 디버 마제기 개발 연구래 진짜 하 먹어나 내가 나 니만 노트도 하 먹어나 제마에 다가라 노트지 아니 노트 게디나 노트게 안 차리 거라 진짜 니만 디바 집아 하 먹어나 네 야 디바 제기마 하 먹어자 디 내가 제바는 디바 차이가 먹어 싸야게 냥아 여러봐 디네자 디바래 디바이마 하고 거래 진짜 하고 봐이나 어디 디바지야 디 야고 중 민도 삼비게 삼다야디 다 개바세요 디시고 봐.
The power of regret requires the initial recognition of a fault as being a fault. Because if one doesn't recognize that something one has thought or said or done is a fault, one will not know. One will not be able to generate regret. And there is the danger, not knowing that a fault is a fault, one will continue to perform it. So for example, if in your place of work, you're doing something in a mistaken way, but you have no idea. And if someone doesn't point that out, you'll keep doing it in a mistaken way. Not with any bad intention, but just out of ignorance. So the first, within the power of regret, one first needs to recognize a fault as a fault.
토메 뒤에 미게 디벨에 기단 기자 이란 지시바 세지 안디니도 순고를 당한 삼단하데 교배계에게 삼단하데 디시 디니 순고를
Again, is going to start now presenting the verse, but here the Tibetan and the English is just very mixed, so we'll start near at the end. But I'll read the whole thing. Before those having great compassion, I confess with regret and vow never to commit again whatever non-virtuous actions I've done since beginning this time, caused others to do, or in which I've rejoiced. So the Tibetan starts with what we have in the third and fourth line.
다 되네 가는 삼당으로서 토메 뒤에서 당 안으로 깨워라 토마요 말해서 지상한 다 소소 지부 삼당에네 토마 매반이 디바빠도 매바사요 그래서 다 소소기 체딜라 당한 디바사바데 체딜라 가지고 갈가르체바 디바 하고요 한 먹어야 먹어요 근데 깨왕하마다 디바 먹고 쉬어서 깨와 토마 매반이 디바빠도 매바사요 그래서 아주 삼당 직체 당 안으로 될이야 제 샘제 담지기 된다라 삼당으로서 지사 랑당 셴 샘제 아주 차 장기 토마 매반이 디바 빠도 매바 사요레서 토마 매반이 아니 지기 되네기 두바 사요레서 토메 뒤네 미게 디비레스 미게 디바 망보 사요레서 누 삼당 거래지네.
The first word in Tibetan is beginningless time. So this then is providing the scope over which we generate regret. So immediately from the very first word, we're recognizing that we are not just to generate regret for what we can explicitly recall in this life, but we need to also recognize that there are so many non-virtuous deeds in this life that we have done and just forgotten about or were never aware of. So all of these need to be confessed, as well as the negativities that we've performed since beginningless time and have no capacity at the current time to recall. So all the negativities that we've done in this life, whether we can recall them or not, were ever aware of them or not, as well as those from past lives, all of these are to be confessed and thereby purified.
아주 เป็น소소리 삼담은 셴리아 안 셴기 셴리아 내 강아지 셴레 뇌버기 셴리 강아지지 안 디바사요 와다 셴레 직수부터 릉하게 거네 안 견주제야나 직수제베든지 디바사요 리유 거네 셴리아 안 니동 다야다 안 지구마고야라 소바디 댕게 셈기 토네 안 셴리아 아직 콘트라사야다 안 직견주에 되니기 다네 릉하 이수미 거네 셴라 되니기 젠 디바사요레스 지나도 삼다베데 셴세디 당하나 저기 태바침비 디갑수 시엔다 제 셴세디 라리아 페마세 게딘 쳔보다 진 쳔보 슈시레 지자 라리아 게딘 쳔보다 진 쳔보 찍리아 니 뭐니치나 니 고슬라 팬도 지고 거레스 니 판도 마체바 대제 아니 가르치네 판도 마체바레라나 수랑 지진에 삼랑 아랑 디게 랑 디기 되바다 둥아세야 담제 니 디도나라 랑 제바제 셴 야와 되제 니 컨실리아 펜버주비에게 게딘 제게 삽들이야 아니 노트제제 아니 컨실라 강아 제시 디버사샤 베사샤 세베게 두스네 삼당 오레제
These faults that we are confessing, how did we generate them? How did we cause these faults? How did we commit these faults? We would have done so through our body, speech, and mind, and they would have been primarily directed at others. So we could have harmed others through our speech, through speaking to others in a harsh way or divisively about others, or lying to and about others. We also would have harmed others physically, and as well as stolen from others. And then every arisal of afflicted minds, no matter to whom it's directed, minds such as anger or attachment, ignorance, these are all the methods or the pathways by which faults were accumulated. Now, if looking at this from the perspective of the Mahayana, we can recognize that so often, instead of being of benefit to our kind mothers, we have actually harmed them. And we have done this because we haven't valued them primarily, but rather, because of being under the influence of our self-cherishing mind, we've put our needs, our desires first. And with wanting to fulfill our needs, whether at the expense of others or not, we have harmed them.
Dine zam, dangoni jine simjen tamjelia rangle jinchimbaza delia pembadu gedin jeje pandi pemba dukordi ine di sablia ani di nge simjen tamje gedin chenpo yinbada anji pandi dukoba dinge ha mogo waje rwada susu mongba dimukche de dimbo ha mogo dimukso dine mongba ha mogo wi genjene nge delia ani konsola kanga jeada deniki dibilega jesha sambe ndus chene that samdaya jikche and the jigne aji dipa saidi dipa delatine jebu saidi dunga ya gyure jisadi dunga dipa sabalatine dunga jebu dunga yongu yobada ha mogwaji jisadi gyunjigi dikbigi jebu dunga yongu yobada ha mogwa dinigi jebu gyunjeliya mongba marikbaje ha mogwaji di genje ngi dipa sa sha 제가 디버를 때는 디버 동어 연구 요반나 수이나 어디서는 나기 요반나 자기 말와 제가 니서 하고 번에 자기 말와 제가 디버 제반에 디 디버도 지만 소소나 동어 연구를 해서 삼나 디버 지기 말해 제가 인님아 디네 디버 제교디 소수기 디버 제발할 때는 디버 동어 요바다 한 먹어와 균리 균리야 레균들 몽바래샤스 몽제 몽바 마리바 디왕경에 두시네 안 디바사샤 하세지 두시네 삼당고래제
Instead of helping kind mother beings, through my ignorance, my lack of knowledge, my confusion, my not knowing about what is helpful and what is harmful, I ended up so often bringing harm into the lives of others, adding to their burden of pain and suffering. So instead of helping others, I harmed them. And so often I didn't do this maliciously, but I did this almost always out of ignorance. Ignorance, a lack of knowledge, a confusion, not understanding cause and effect, not understanding that a way of thinking or acting under that way of thinking will bring harm. This ignorance, this confusion, particular of the law of cause and effect, is what led me so often to make these decisions that brought harm to others. And even on those occasions when I had knowledge, that knowledge wasn't integrated enough. I wasn't convinced, and therefore I acted in a way that brought harm to others.
소소 삼다나 지바로다 되는 지바진 사와 사여로다 걸 지바로와 코로나도 심제 샹다지 다 니샹리야 녀버치도 코로나도 샹디 장을 진심보다 게진심보 하모고 디겐진 랑 지징이 돈의 제바다 아니 년직 디비게 제보도 동어 용배 하모고지 디모 레균들 몽바 마릭바 디겐진 디바 제바레서 다 삼다다 심전 다 나랑게 되네 제샤 제상 나래 샹바 샹다디기 디바사한디게 차서 미 나신 지바도 제바레서 베게 삼다.
We remind ourselves here that I am not unique in this position. All other ordinary beings, since beginningless time, through their acts of body, speech and mind, have acted in ways that brought harm to others, and thereby accumulated vast stores of imprints that will lead to suffering. So others too are in a similar pitiful position, with these stores of karmic imprints on their continuum that will lead to suffering for the self-same reasons as I accumulated those causes.
Then tobe mibi le gidan seter soso jeba set di gibat. Da gidu zawa sedi da shenle jejuba. Tome dine migi di bele gidan sedi. Da di tishi sarson. Da gizal sedro. Gizal sene soso majibane shenle jejuba. Janlia de delia and Jala Mandikuma Jasha, Janlia Nedon Tansho Sada, Janlia Jackson Shis Machi, Shan Sheju Jorva, Diva Ordine, the Nigi Shanlia, Diva Chechuba, Mangboy, that Rangine, Diva Shanlia, that Yawa Toma Meba and Zanyaman, the Nigi Shanlia, Diva Chechu, the Shanlia Chechuba, Mangboy, then the Nigi Chechu and the Diva Sayo.
Genla has thus far explained the whole of our third line, whatever non-virtuous actions I have done. So the non-virtuous actions through body, speech and mind, since beginningless time, now coming to our fourth line, caused others to do. So this is where we have directed others or encouraged others to engage in activities that leads to the accumulation of non-virtue, whether through their body, speech, or mind.
And in the that is a Kaji Semjen Soja, or the Hasume Diva Sakis, a Jesuit, and Michel Yakuyan, the Diva Jibasa, the Diva Man Sagore, Shen Semjen So Juba, Sosugi, So Jubi, also Lalan Diamante, Sosugi, Shen So Judu Juba, and the Diva Sagor, Social Sagore. The Shen Pajo di Midigi, So Juba, the Shen Kola Diva Sagorwa, Jisa Rashin Nigal Diva Sagore.
So some who perhaps know a little bit about cause and effect, but clearly haven't understood it well, they do not want to engage in a particular non-virtuous activity, for example, killing. But they're happy to let others to do it or encourage others to do it, say, I'm not going to do it, I don't want the suffering result, but yes, please, you do the killing for us. So here what has happened is the other person who's engaged in the killing has created the karma of killing. But you, who encouraged them or even instructed them to do it, have accumulated even more non-virtue than if you had done it yourself, because your act led to someone else creating the causes of suffering through killing, as well as the being killed. So in one's ignorance, one has compounded the suffering that one has created, as well as caused someone else to create causes for suffering.
이랑 지치바세 이랑 지치바세 이랑 지치발라나 소수게 디바 마체바체 소수게 샤나라 디바 제쇼스네 마체바 지그 마쿠와체 미션다게 직제쇼 디바 제쇼로와 제질라 앞에 야고 준샤센 제수이나체 그 야고 제샤세 베네 디용으로 당한 적에 미 제갑니 마라 캬베네 제 소수기 데스 마가 디다 소수기란 제 가시게 제갑지게 샹달레 지도 어디디 야고 중샤 콘스 톱샤시데 콘스 마 톱샤시 제수이나 제샤고로 지단 디디버사고 제자 미랑기 마체바 랑기 샹레 제로체 마쿠베네 미샹다기 디버체바 텔야 어디 제수이나 제베네 디바사고레 제레 제수이랑 이랑 지치바시데다
Cause others to do, or in which I have rejoiced. So here, one hasn't done the negative deed oneself, or encouraged or instructed someone else to do it, but rather, just as an observer has generated joy in the harmful deeds of some, and the results that others therefore experience. So for example, rejoicing in the victory of one group or one nation over another. So here, when harm comes to an enemy, taking delight in that, rejoicing in that, leads to the accumulation of non-virtue.
다 토마 코와 토마 메바네 랑다 셴아 디베사칸 차상기 코와 토마 메바네 소소랑이 디바빠도 메바 레 디비 제보 둥하용고 바 하모고 와시 레균들 몽비 토네 마 하모고 있는 디바빠도 메바 사요레세 직지 아니 셴 라소시게 마제바 응어수 마제바네 셴리아 디바 제주제 셴리아 두신 제주 디바 몽바 사요레세 삼다 직시 질량 직생기 랑게 마제 셴리아 제도 마주바네 미생기 디벨레가 제바텔레 어디 티샤 삼네 야고 준샤도 제수 이란제네 디바 사요레 제가 디바 데도 빼 너도 준샤 저베게 다 데네기 자오이네 팀도 너도 준샤 삼베게 다 데네기 삼다주 교바지야데 삼다에다 디레
The next word in the Tibetan is the word that we have in the third line, whatever. So whatever here serves to summarize the three ways that we have accumulated non-virtue, which is either what we have directly done, I have done, or caused others to do, or in which I've rejoiced. And not just what we can recall, and not just what we've done in this life but have forgotten or been unaware of, but everything since beginningless time. All of this is to be confessed and thereby purified.
안디네 인자다 Nyamagi Diva Chevandri, Juza Benga Diva Chusepe, Duja Chesha, Sembean, Semaki was Shuche Oyomalda, Semaki was Chenaji Pandoska, that Chida de Notuche says at the bed Yapuchum Minu Sempiki, Yovache. Yanjik di gyoba cheja yanjik ba pusudo ko changa dene nga kyo shu nga di ba shu sa sha shanda samla shanda ma da di kyan ya ta de ba ne yang ka nga de ma do phando so ma le jesa di gyoba che di minu sam da ga re di ni ba la ga sam so da di minu nya ma dene de ba jun sha dene je yo re ine da no ru jun ba re ine da di je ba re ine da diring shaayagi di meba soyagi kukhab tingalaya yakudu seza diringa ne ji milyu rinpoche top ane chwe je ya kukhab ra deniga lama da je sungchi deniga ngalaya dikwa meba soyagi kukhab yaku shaayagi pe kukhab yakudu wa diringde mashane tabmido diring kukhab yode kabla shaagi insenbe meba soyagi insenbe da kukhab yoba pe yakure insenbe samdaya di yanchi nipa di samdangu gore.
And the key point I want to make, so please do bear this in mind. Here we are to generate regret. We are to generate regret, not guilt. So we generate regret because it's through generating regret that we are acknowledging that a fault is a fault and therefore should not be repeated. But don't grasp at that, don't hold on to that. Rather, having generated regret, rejoice in the opportunity that you have, the opportunity that you yourself have accumulated the causes for. The causes to have achieved a precious human rebirth in this life, to have met the Dharma in this life, met a qualified spiritual teacher in this life, and to now have the opportunity to purify these negative deeds. So thinking like this then, will break any habit one may have to grasp on and hold to regret and thereby generate guilt. Guilt doesn't help, it serves no purpose. Regret, purify, let go, and try not to repeat again.
쟁가를 세도 당한주 개뷰디 시고를 투지체된 쟁가를 세도 당한주 때 드린 고급 야고도 제상한주 초신 라마 이담 상예 자선 보고를 추교서만 탐제 양이 둔두야 선백에 삼다제 나 되네야 네 셈제 다디디 랑다 신 셈제 탐지기 디버사샤바데 드링이 닝거 르베데네다 되네야 랑기 둔기 이담 가서래 초신을 하소 디들이야 니르유드네 샤긴 선백에 삼다제 디 삼다제 될야 아니 소수드리야 초신되게 여바들야 세탑 물론 자주심지 세 군의 심지 탐지기 동아디 영이 디가서 디바사시버딩이 샤기 제자데 디링 라마 이담 상이 dwindle 샤긴 선배 삼다데 다 띠엔디게 바 띠엔디 미유사 답 안델야 군로스 셈자 탐지 디바티 영의 샤기 디리 샤기 선배게 데네 가신 뚜디네 샤야 고호라와데 베 야고슈 고호 야고슈에스 가신 뚜지 디린 샤야바데 고호슈 조선 가신 뚜지 뭐네 누시네 안자에게 삼다데 삼다니 띵이 돕te 삼다고 띠엔디 유샤야기 띠 안 초신되게라 삼 대바 제제 삼다 안디든다 샤기 세비 안데네 소소 군로 셈자 탐지기 디바데 네 샤기 셈자 탐지기 된다 린 셈베게 샤기 셈베 삼다 두시데 다 띵이 돕te 차고래 투지체데 쟁가를 세데
This then links into the next opponent power, that of the basis or reliance. Now we come to what for us is the first line, before those having great compassion. So before us is the entire merit field. And we having generated this visualization, previously called forth the wisdom beings, really feeling their presence, we have now, before them, confessed these negative deeds that we have either both recalled, as well as those we can't recall but know at some point would have been done. So we're confessing to the beings in the merit field with the feeling of their presence. And their presence is part of the power of the Ponen power of the basis or reliance. And further, as part of this, is our mind of refuge towards them, as well as a mind of bodhicitta. So with a mind of bodhicitta, which includes the thoughts I've just mentioned in the previous segment about not holding on to regret and generating guilt, with a mind that is quite light and joyous, we think, how fortunate I am to be using my precious human rebirth so well, to have met the Lama, to be engaging in this practice now, and for the sake of all suffering mother sentient beings, I am confessing my previously accumulated non-virtue. And I'm doing this so as to eradicate all karmic imprints, negative karmic imprints on my continuum, so that I can rapidly become a Buddha for the sake of others. So that those beings that are directly and indirectly, intentionally and unintentionally harmed, that those beings I can now benefit them, and benefit them in the most meaningful way by becoming a Buddha and leading them to attain their own state of Buddhahood. So here, in the power of reliance, as expressed in our first line, before those having great compassion, we remind ourselves of the merit field before us and our intimate relationship with them, regenerate refuge in bodhicitta, and this way we continue in this practice for the sake of all beings.
Tuji Cheten, that and Choshing Lama, the next Saturday, and Tuji Chembo said that Zewa, Zewiki, Nietzsche, Semjan Tamji, Dunga said that Digutu, Zewa Ni Chembo, the Demba, the Nietzsche Chembo Demba, and Jike Chembo Yunden, Zewi Yunden, Nubi Yunden, the Lama Chonso, Jane Nars, Coron, Jens and Mixio, Nars and Dulisio, says that Coron do the Harlangi. Diva shaggy is your man. Then has dear rather been Michilia Gonda, she love winner. Coron Dunangla, the Coron Masses Michandala, or then Gonda Laura, there's Tavayorova, Dunan Lady. She's a jangers that didn't Taharalaya, Lama, Idam Coron, Tuji Coron, Zevi, and then Kimby, Nubi, the Nigio, but is a Coron Dun Taharaling, Coron, the Hamitosa Taharaling, Diva shaggy is your jangar said.
The word that we have translated as before literally is in front of or before the eyes. So this is referring to those with great compassion. So the beings in the merit field, Lama, Yidam, the Buddhas, etc. Those who possess the qualities of wisdom, love and compassion, right before their eyes, right before them, we're engaging in this practice of confession. So this invokes the feeling of closeness and presence that we should have generated in this practice, knowing that these beings are here, and we are face to face, confessing our previously accumulated misdeeds, and soon will promise not to repeat them.
So that thing you took to say that we could not teach, and that kind of says that Shabbat. Nyembu to top some diet, Carson, you seem ye sha shing, so the Jida, Nyama Cheba, the Nortu Chesha, Sebi Gyovakieda, Digyovakiene, that same Tamjiki departing Shagins and Tindilia set up, that shactions the got showers, that Delia, Dustin, that Shaya Delia, and the Dunga Shaba Duenche, Cha Pubina, that the Nyembu to top silver. Cha Puya Jorova, China, Dunsha Tuen, that China, Deji, Tibetan, Norsha, some Cuba, the Genial Drosarava, that during and the Toshin di Dunia, and then a deeper shaggy, some jet, most shaking, some jet, some that thing to some taza. That also shaking some and the Alan Janzuke, Dunga Shaba Tuen, that, yeah, give you till a debate, say you to the debate, some jet, Tamji debate, the tower show or some jet, and so deep jet, and the jet. Yeah, don't wash up doing Jen as a chat sebena, that the Yambu should top set did it. Yambo did it, he was shaking when the Yambo did. Shaxing said, Shaxing said.
Text continues, I confess with regret. So here we start with the power of the antidote, where we are engaging in an antidotal practice so as to purify our previously accumulated negativities. And so we're doing this through the act of prostration. As we know, when we engage in confession prayer or generate regret, we join our palms together. So this, the joining of the palms together is a physical act of prostration. And this physical act of prostration, motivated by the mind of regret, this serves as the antidotal power amongst the four opponent powers. And the power of the antidote, or the antidotal power, this can be done more extensively than a hand prostration. For example, one can recite mantras such as the Vajrasattva's 100-syllable mantra, so as to expand this particular opponent power.
동반요 공부나 지고래 동반요 공부 잠니제 공부나 지고래 장주심 공부나 지고래 네 고니 딕들이야 소수기 매바다 소수기 소술이야 안 바베 가리 대 야가 용도 된 소수기 되니기 공부하다 야가 가리 용도 대삼다제 된마 안도시네 대리야 아니 지금 님보군 제 님보 제야지라 디버샤기 두소딥지 제야들 동샤 되제 차푸야 디고래 디메네 메이게 되나 지고래 디메나 메니타야다 아니 믹심바타야 아니 디메나 안지 동반이 삼다 동반이 고미야 안 잠니죠 고바 차사님 복군도 지글도 최고 가르지나 지고래.
Within the opponent power of the antidote, I want to make one important point, is whilst there are certain practices that are generally very closely associated with purification, such as the recitation of the Vajrasattva mantra, in actuality, here, for this opponent power, any virtuous activity serves as the antidote. So if one feels more inclined to reciting a different mantra, whether, say, the Mani mantra or the Miksema, that is fine. It will serve, just like the Vajrasattva, to purify. Or if one is more inclined to do prostrations, prostrations can be done as the antidotal power. Or if one prefers to engage in meditation, one can meditate on love, or on compassion, or generate bodhicitta again, or to further meditate on emptiness. So in brief, whatever virtuous practice one is more inclined to, whether something physical like prostration, verbal such as recitation of mantra, or solely on the mental side such as meditation on love, compassion, bodhicitta, emptiness, or another dharma topic, any of these virtuous practices serves as the antidotal power.
이게 사야 되겠지나 이게 그때 사면은 되고 다야 라면나 줘들 라면나주는 제유 돈에 이게 사제 참 이게 사야게 즉 여러와 참되어 봐야다 참되어 라면나주는 제유 돈에 다 라면나주를 개바는 뒤바다 딩나 소용고래 저 라면나주 개바 세바네 그런 지제다 제유 권에다 상화 뒤바다 안테셔다 다게 된제 아직 이게 사용고래 용고래 나데네 라면나주 딩로 지베나 달라마 쳬버된 디바도 레제 샤신은 지미유 돈바뉴에서 디바도레 델레사베 첼야 당원저기 이게 사바나 라면나주단 제외도네 이게 사디 참세 사반디스 디바 참델레사고래 안디 잠샤되된 된 마된로 고로 안디나시 믹셈바이네 잘 믹셈마되야들이야 그지 그한 라면나주단 제외도네 믹셈바 사야도 안 델레사바이나 안디 라마 쳬바다 제외는 사바나 데바도레 델리아 레주당 저기 근데 데바도 믹스 마사지나 디고로 그래서 딕샤지 돼 갑이야. 야 믹스 마사 가 잔다지 용구를 다 될이야. 아 저기 소수기 님보 또주고니 디부샤야기 돈달 님보들 님보군도 주에 또들 믹스 마사바다 메니 사와나 안데 봐도래 안 차부야나 차담에나 라메너주나 지유고니 동샤된데 차부이제 디부샤바이나 안데 봐 삼디바도 돼 안데 차부이든 마지 안 잠제라 안 잠샤도 되는 마도연 거 라메너주나 지유고니 이게 사야 되라 이게 사야 되라 라메너주데 기해봐 제바이나 도지지제나 지유도네 도지지에 된 대단 지유도 초가 된 베토네 다게 된 베토네 이게 사야 용거래서 대쇼다 지유고는 상어디보다 지유네 용거래서 내줄라메 징제나 라마 쳬바들에 라마 내줄라메 라메너주 뒤바제바나 가델하게 마세야 될 마도 이거래 된데sen요
The practice of Guru devotion can be expressed in expansive, middling, and abbreviated ways. An expansive way to engage in the practice of Guru devotion could be to do the sadhana of Yamantaka. And there, within that, there is a part that is an extensive confession limb, or serves the purpose of the confession limb, in that there is the Vajrasattva practice within the Yamantaka sadhana. And so this would be an extensive way not only to do confession, but to engage in a practice of Guru Yoga. Whereas if the practice that we're looking at here, that of Lama Chöpa, is of the varying lengths, it's a middling length practice of Guru Yoga. A shorter practice of Guru Yoga would be that of Ganden Lagyama. Within this middling length of Guru Yoga, one can do this confession verse can be done in a more extensive way, as I've just mentioned. For example, one can recite the Vajrasattva mantra, the 100-syllable mantra, or the Miksema, or do prostrations, whatever one's more inclined to.
친친의 방아 자오기는 지금이야 선비게 domsum기에 들이다.
The Tibetan ends with what we have in the second line, and vow never to commit again. So of the four opponent powers, this is the final one, the fourth one, the power of the promise, or the power of restraint.
오늘 디네 자당은 디버샤야기 다디 도나디레다 혼돈달라 다디니기가 주기야 젠랴 디바체발로 규베 삼바체바데 디베체발라 교베체바이나 냐마 디베체바들 교베체바네 개화해셔래 디베체발라 개화체바네 교베체나 개화차고래 양지 개화제제 어디게 개화제 노르 빼서 마진 따라서 교베체네 디베체고래서 개화제바직라 지치소 어디게 마진 따라서 교베체나 디바사고래 디바차고래 냐마 디바제제 어디게 노르 빼사사서 교베체 소반 디 교베데 개화래 제사다든 디닝아 주게다디 녀보도 쉬고네 샤야도 냐마 디바치바든데 제샤서 빼사샤 선비게 삼당에도 디차상 개화차대로 개화차고래 다딩이 톱데 개비디게 사답 어느 군노 전주선나 잠로다 전주선 사답 안기 땡기 유 개비 소신들려 대바제지도 이제 구송도 연된 대제 대바제도 깔라 디차상 개화와 아니 다 되니기 때문에 다 디링이 디들이야 나 지금 탐지 디버티 소수지부 많이 샘전 탐지 디버 가르쳐봐야 차상 내디 디링 샤긴 삼제 안나 저기다 될이야 이게시 돼 봐이나 디돈 디버 샤기 삼비게 니 개비디길래 제지도 삼다지 디버 샤기 스네 되네 네 이게 사봐이나 데 개화래 차상 개화래 나 친친은 디버사도 자오기는 지금에 삼비게 dom심사데 디한 개화래 차상 개화라들 제산 디 개화데 디네게 두치네까지 직삼선다 차상 삼로나라 삼로데 개화냐냐 차되기 개화책으로 제산 삼로 개화 차상 두치도 디 개화데까지 뉴버처 삼로나야 지기 가제 제베네 삼로데 베네가서 슈글 마서 추날 말로데 추날 가제바나 롬바 슈체제 루고와 디나신 안저 디네게 삼로나라 가제 가제 땅베네 데네야 삼로나 개위 바샤 뉴버처 루고라 Jirodu Nimigi Diva Sashabatipa, called Nuberchun Mada Gorba, Diva Chang said in the Changorba.
I hope the four opponent powers then are clear. The power of regret, the power of reliance, or the basis, the power of restraint, and the power of the antidote. And these are presented in varying orders at different times, but they are presented separately so that one can understand them. But there's actually a connection between all of them in that all of them are virtuous, and therefore all of them serve as an antidote. So one would generally, whilst these four can be done in any sequence, one generally will start with generating regret. Recalling non-virtues one has done, recognizing that they brought harm to others, and the karmic result will bring harm to oneself. Regret is generated for what one can recall and what one can't recall but knows would have done at some point across the expanse of lifetimes. And the generation of regret for non-virtue is virtuous. And being virtuous, it serves to purify. The antidote, an explicit antidote, whether it's prostration or the recitation of the Vajrasattva mantra, of course, this is virtuous and serves to purify. But so too is the power of the basis or reliance. That opponent power too is virtuous because it is, firstly, the practice of Guru Yoga, where having reflected on the qualities and kindness and benefits that our lamas bring to us, we've generated this extensive merit field. That is virtuous, serves to purify. So too has our previously, at the outset, the preliminaries to this practice, we generated refuge, bodhicitta, the wisdom realizing emptiness. So all of those will be included within reliance and are virtuous and therefore serve to purify. And therefore are also part of the antidotal power, although they are explicitly that of the reliance or basis. And then the fourth opponent power, that of the power of restraint, where one is committing to restrain from engaging in such negativities again, or can be translated as the power of the promise, where you promise not to do it, or can also be translated as the power of the vow, where you make a vow not to commit these non-virtues again. So the word is literally vow. So you vow never to do it again. And of course, whether it's a mind of restraint or a promise or a vow, this is virtuous. Being virtuous, it serves to accumulate merit and to purify. So therefore, whilst there are these four distinct opponent powers, and one should practice all four, all of them serve to accumulate virtue and thereby purify. Because as I've mentioned previously in the analogy, as much sunshine as we can bring to the wet piece of paper, we will thereby be able to ever more quickly dry it out. So therefore, as often as one can, one should recall these opponent powers because they are virtuous and thereby purify our continuum through the accumulation of virtue.
Lama Chöpa Tibetan dineki that nimbo tupshu kone shatade dinyeli anti soshin sa davya andinichenen Chopa di chatsawa Chopa dinishasen dinichenen ma nimbo tupshu kone dibashaya sa ligura de dembarashu des mangura chuku duguwa inji that lamina dewa main baje jidane nga jugi dibakarashene nimbo tupshu kone dibasha duzu tungdo jinalya samta tuya chegore lamina de dewa main baje kursosarangi nimbo tupshigone tenen benanga de kombaje de buji soye de kangbe nemji buji soye songwena namzang tongro bada o de besa sha singi nor ma thwaji soye besa sha sambege dingminu sambe samdan namsa gyoba jesarwa samne andi lamsa gyoba jesana aji dadi konjo choju gyawa seda cheba khen samje sosugi dünlia sanye tamje yue sambege sam mabataje da diringi khen samje nge one 닝제 sambe 닝제 kun에 랑하다 디 nge hamo soje 닝제 다지 디바디 양의 샤기 인제자 초주 gyawa seda cheba dün류 yue sambe sam다je yue서 매바제네 띵기 돕들리거라 Delian says, Omani Bimo, Kazi Jang to in a Chikja Shabana, Tikashi Mother Jambana, Dini Diba Shagin, did Chojiwa Senachi with Julian Shagin, some Taja, many Kachi Tembana, then many Tadi, Yamukundu Jubet of Sechagora. Then my own Bana in a Dinigi, Pazu the subsubject, Nimche Sugmea, Sembe Samtana, Gasode, Domba Sechagora. Jizadi. Tuno Ginalia, Manzi import of Shukone, that it was how was on Lamsa, and the Nick import of Shukone, some dash, Shatubena, then as a Yapungorva, that in the Chitu Chagorwa.
This entire practice, both of what we've covered and will still cover, serves to accumulate vast stores of merit and thereby purify our continuum of non-virtue. So we could say, there have already been 38 verses of purification practice because there have been 38 verses of the accumulation of merit. So this Guru Yoga practice of Lama Chöpa is an extensive practice of accumulation and purification, and explicitly in this 38th verse, one generates the 4 opponent powers. But this is not the only time that one should generate the 4 opponent powers. These can and should be generated quickly and whenever necessary. For example, if one is walking and inadvertently steps on an insect, kills an insect, by now we recognize that that is a mother sentient being, and I, in error, have harmed it, perhaps killed it. That will immediately lead to regret arising, virtue being accumulated, and the first opponent power naturally arising within us. Then build on that and intentionally generate the other 3 opponent powers. Recall the Buddha, generate refuge and confess, I made a mistake. I didn't mean to, but I brought harm inadvertently to another. Generate bodhicitta, compassion for the being whose life has ended. This life that they value so has suddenly ended. Generate compassion for the suffering being. Generate the aspiration, may they have a good rebirth. And then perhaps recite some manis, even if just a few. Dedicate that merit to this and all beings. May all beings attain only good rebirths, come under the care of Mahayana Lamas, and rapidly progress to enlightenment. And then, fourthly, promise to try to walk with more care and not to bring harm to others. So in this way, one quickly, without much effort, generates vast stores of merit and purifies one's continuum.
저기 되게 처벌을 부여해네. 나중에 죽어라 시도비네. 달람사 안에 디삼다쇼 그래. 저기 어달 라다신 semja 사상게 고아 토마메 디바 먹고 싸요래서 다디링 디바디게 노르레 데자다 메디 초주 디고라 고르데 갑리아 안가 저기 처벌 부여도 있나 가른나 델리아 덴델리아 델라티는 게 디바디 샤기 산베기 되네. 매바체 안델리아 나 저기 처벌 부여기 제 부여네 디 개바델라 되네 디바디 샤바 제다 안에 고라고라기 되네 디바 샤바제야 마음반에 안에 직되게 다 라야 디버션이 디버치기메 사마다 샹레예나 양이 디버마제베 꾸마제지 안도 직 디버제마주게 덤섬기 주기 선배 삼다바이나 당저기 데네게 님부터 쉬고네 삼다네 뒤투노 지나리야 안저게 두치네 지게 삼다투야 최고래.
As with that illustration, we can see that the 4 opponent powers can quickly be called to mind. It just takes a few moments. And it can be done too with whatever virtuous activity one is engaging in. For example, if doing circumambulation or if one is engaging in an offering practice. As one is engaging or about to engage in this virtuous practice, one can recall harmful acts that one has done, knowing that today we would have caused some harm in the world, and certainly since beginner's time so many times. So here we generate regret for the harm that we will have advertently or inadvertently brought to others. And now, so I make the commitment to try not to ever harm others again, second opponent power. And I do so because they're my kind mother beings. And I want to accumulate virtue and eradicate obstacles so I can become a Buddha and thereby lead beings to attain their own state of Buddhahood. So here, we're generating the power of reliance. And then one engages in whatever the virtuous act one is, whether it's circumambulation or making offerings, and one does so. And it takes no longer than a few moments. In this way, even greater stores of merit are skillfully generated.
Chöshi chibi kabli na ngai na da kyono zi na da nga zi di chöshi chibi kabli nye le ya na di ringi jigi chö nye ya ina de ni xie na chasa na semjian tam jigi do sanje gobang tobi chidu yin ya sembi di ni samdang de semjian tam jigi kowa tome rang na zubi semjian tam jigi kowa tome diba sa yi sipe mangbo sa yor de zi ani no chu chung ya di ring ani ngi di chö gi do da nyamlen chi diba de xia yin sembi ge samdang ju du shen jebe na nga zugi nyan xie chö nyan xie chibi kabli na nyembo tupshu ko ne ane chigi diba saba dan gewa saya da diba chaya nan dushi ne chasan chagyorwa dene jade ane nyembo tupshu ko ne samdana di da gewa kara chibi na di samdana di kogab di dushi tunu chi na le samdana tuya chiri de tuwe ne ane chigi diba ma chaya dan gewa saya liya ane nyuba shiragi 첨보를 채고로와 또 첨보 채고로와 지사 당한 저기 디바샤에게 탑람들에 님뭐 톱슈고네 샤고를 해서 디바샤에게 탑람들 손샤바에서 디딩은 탑람들 삼담바에 나가 저기 도시네 개와 걸두베네 디네 갑라 아니 가스코소레 디바차야다 개와사야라 톱치어 채고로와 안디링 되네체 안데 제마 아데마 지수 일하세야다데 고시 라마시디 제일 마수야지.
I encourage you to play with what I've presented here, finding circumstances, a wide variety of circumstances to generate the four opponent powers. For example, when I walk down the hill to give a teaching, or in your case, when you come here to receive a teaching, I generate the four opponent powers and I encourage you to do the same. So for example, now I'm going to give a Dharma teaching or receive a Dharma teaching. This is a tremendously fortuitous act. I'm going to accumulate vast stores of merit. I'll listen well, I'll apply it well, or I'll pass on my knowledge with a good motivation. And through this merit that I'm going to accumulate, I dedicate it so that all the past harm that I've brought to others, that is purified, all harm that I have brought to others, all acts I've engaged in that are contrary to the teaching I'm about to give or receive, may that be purified through this merit that I'm accumulating. And I commit to act in accordance with these teachings and thereby not harm others again. So here in this way, quickly generate the four opponent powers as one's walking to the teaching hall or standing here. Immediately, despite initially generating regret, the mind will become joyous at this opportunity to accumulate vast stores of merit, purify negativities, and thereby be able to be of ever greater benefit to others. So hopefully then it's clear how through applying the four opponent powers skillfully, that one's mind should be joyous, not holding on to past misdeeds, not generating guilt, but being joyous at our spiritual development. We'll conclude there for tonight, but if you have any questions, then feel free to ask. Cameron?
Just back. Just give me a moment. Just find it. Where we sorry. I was just trying to find it. Does anyone else got a question?
Maybe Cameron just to say.
Oh, okay. Yeah. No. Either case.
What do you do in situations, like we're talking about how if you tell someone else to also do a negative action, then both people kind of get this negative karma for it. What do you do in situations where like the whole community kind of acts in a certain way, right? And through that you may be actually creating non-version, but there's no other option. So like, for example,
So you're not the instigator. You're
No,
just
it's
part
like the
of
whole community acts in that way, and there's no other option but to do it that way.
So if one is compelled through a group activity to engage in something non-virtuous and has no choice, what can one do? Okay, for one's own negativity that one oneself has accumulated, and for themselves. Yeah.
You know, you don't really want to do it. But
Yeah.
you're compelled to do it.
Okay.
And the Yeshiva, that you consider deeper chicken to chicken, Jimmy Jewa, chick Jewa, Chevan, Jelia, and the chick, or the jit in the Jones or in either, take no deeper chair, no tree in that, chick, some did not to June, some died raw. Just that around that Shen Chasa Tiba side, didn't say during it, yeah, and the conchuya, so you turn and the Lamaita Sanye, Chikia Conchotikia, so tapche. Tipa shagi samche sosorangi da jig jigngara sabinada da ya chanchu semra kombana komra kavena tuscha and monbana and the negi yanjik tipa mayaki and the besu chicken sampege tablam chicken sampe some dash and the quote nipoto shukone tipa shaga the chagorwa.
In such illustration, apply the four opponent powers, recognizing the fault that oneself as well as others engaged in. So that's the first. Then, recognizing that there's non-virtue being accumulated, one confesses to one's visualized Lama, Yidam, and Buddha. So then they are the reliance. And then one can generate an antidote, such as generating bodhicitta, bodhicitta for all beings. So that's the third, that would be antidote. And then finally, one commits to trying not to be in such a situation again where one is compelled to do something non-virtuous. So in whatever way is appropriate, try to apply the four opponent powers.
Disula Tipe Ling Ambassador Sago, Ling Ambassador Madi, Kiawachima, Manson Kiegi, Denigi, Kiegile, Sago Mare. Benanga to pass to the combat to the chick Boom Mambo company named the Sugore. Sugor the inner now to get how Goma studio Kuno Mare. Mebaza, Susukuno Mebaza, Delia named Sugor the inner and Dipati. Nanson Kiegi, Liang and Bitty for the Sago Mare. Got there Chungchuma, the Chungchuma, you go Mare.
Where there are instances where one truly has no freedom, no control, no say over engaging in an activity, then the motivation to do it is lacking. And therefore, whilst the perhaps harm has been brought to another being, the karmic action is not complete because one of the requirements, the four requisites, is missing, that of motivation or intention. So it's similar, although the situation is quite different when you're compelled to do something, but it's similar to where one unknowingly does something. For example, walking down a path, one stands on and kills an insect. One had no wish to do it, one was perhaps completely oblivious to it, but yet a being died under one's own foot. So there, again, the karmic deed is not completely accumulated, still non-virtuous, but it's not complete because there was no motivation or intention. So in this way, we can see there's a similarity.
칼알 맛은 충분히 봐도 맞대베나 디자 군론라 때네 개와사 개와 주셔요 디나지를 디버지야 되려야 디버 편에 심진 지게 디엔레 뇌바 자와지바 지버 임바 질야 군론ля 배 팔면 뇌베 셈베 삼보디 직삼로 숙천부셔 아니 냐만에 양 삼로도 윤릉부지 같이 여베네 데니게 편에 뇌바 자와지네 디버지에서 거래 뇌베 자와지바 질야 군론ля 지라 하모가지 뇌바 자와지네 디버 충충체가 거래 但是让我们说出来，让我给你们呗，现在人给再往里拖呢，家庭这里啊，俺这现在那边医学中国的话，说公路了，早给你人家当个对吧？没什么，让我们把这把的了，这来地方穷穷嘛的地方有，全部两岸把靠岸这个地方两岸把这个烧个嘛的，就是地方烧了，给我烧把的公路个在切原来，就叫我就给我修切的，你那是地方烧的公路给我。 같이 군로 그지 숙체에다 디바 숙체 군로 중앙에 디바 중앙에 군로 매나 디바요 말에
As mentioned earlier, the strength of the virtue accumulated is largely dependent on the motivation. For example, if one generates bodhicitta, great stores of merit is accumulated. But even within that, there's going to be variety. If it's a mere expression of words, the amount of merit accumulated is far less than if it's heartfelt and sincere. Likewise, if it's heartfelt and sincere but quickly forgotten, whilst vast stores of merit will be accumulated, it will still be far less than a heartfelt and sincere motivation of bodhicitta that has a long duration and perhaps stays present throughout the virtuous act and even beyond. So therefore, depending on the motivation, the strength of the virtue, it's an independence on the motivation, the strength of the virtuous act is either slight, middling, or great. And it's the same with non-virtuous actions. If something is done intentionally or unintentionally, it's a different result. If something is done intentionally with great attention and delight, it's far more negative than at the other extreme, where something is done unknowingly or with an awareness, but with a strong wish that I wish I wasn't in this position. I wish I wasn't having to do this. I don't want to ever be in this position again. In this latter case, the act is not complete because the motivation is lacking. Therefore, whilst it is a non-virtuous act, it is not complete. So therefore, the non-virtue that's accumulated is slight. Cameron?
Yeah. We're talking about there is, in relation to causing another form of negative act, there is, I think you said that there is more non-virtue in this than in the act itself. Yeah. Would that be true of people who are choosing to eat meat from the supermarket, whereby a person was at an abattoir, killing the animals, and the person was effectively being directed by them because of the demand created by someone else.
So
effectively, they're creating greater negativity than even the person killing the animals.
yeah. So the person, if greater negativity is created by directing someone else to engage in non-virtue, then through someone purchasing meat, they are indirectly causing someone to butcher. Therefore, it's not more non-virtue created than by the purchaser than by the butcher themselves. Okay.
디과요 말들이야 가서네 대대 기단 기제 그 결혼 수시 아스는 가요 말와 세뉴간디 결혼 샤디 수시 알아요 말아 기회제 다들 그 수바들 배그 수시 배 야부 중샤 나사라서 삼반의 지수이라지 딘 디바용 거래 딘이 지수이라 마체바는 디바용 거 말. 야 말. 저게 제수 일한 마제 델이야 안에 쇠기 구마 마제 바인데 데데 숨가 참고 말아 구마 제선 결혼한테 쇠쇼세 말아봐나 기도 잡아도 말아 내 제수 일하도 교수에 빼하고 준 디스에는 간서 살아라고 삼배는 제수 일하 제발에 니네게 삼마다에는 제수 일하 제발 요 말아
It's the act of purchasing and the act of butchering are too indirect for the act of purchasing to lead to the accumulation of non-virtue. Where it would be the accumulation of non-virtue is if the purchaser had directed the butcher to slaughter the animal. Then it's direct. But there is too much distance between someone purchasing the meat of an animal and the butcher some time before, through their own volition, killing the animal before them. For the purchaser, because of this distance between the acts, there's nothing direct at all. There is no negativity accumulated through the purchase of the meat.
I struggle with that.
디 연구를 대 삼다나 망고요래 그래서네 나 샤산의 디고요래 슬랍칸 삼다나 직지고 연구래 델야 그래서네 샤디 사한면에 쇠가요 말 사월에 때네 쇠고레스 디진체네 아니 디고 연구래서 디시고래 셰타 지경고래 다당 안주 가르쳐서 군노 삼모타는 시거로와 랑기 디고 제바 샹라 제도 주바 제수 일하 제바 제번에 디티고 말짱아도 디난 시고로 와다 디고 시고로 와다 미 다등이 랜제 가서 소수기 디바 제교 말와 소수기 소쇼 생각하는 라요 말와 총괄 결혼 샤서 양이 요가 라요 말와 소샤 지도 자와도 말와 아니 결혼 시스템을 빼야고서 제수 일하 제요 말와 디나데 숨가 차요 말이지 이게 해야 되디래 나디 데 사한 메나 샤스가 요마 샤스네 디고 요레스 가르스네 샤사한 요바자 사한을 띠네 수고를 디자 사한을 디고 요레스 디겐티 디고 요레 랍간지 삼다하지 요레 아니 야데네게 야델야 삼다나 니버제 용그레데 디 다디디 안주디 디다 되어 말에 다디 결혼 삼다디 제사 샤스네 디고 요레스 가르스네다 샤사와 인자 코주 녀한 요바즈 델레티는 총고를 제자 디보요래 사실 디키시어 디네수 삼다나 카가래 다른 아주 샤바디 장기 디바 제바 시한래 제도 주바 제수 이랑 제바 디키시어로 봐.
So I'll answer it in two ways. I'll answer your thoughts on this in two ways. So firstly, what we're looking at here is negativities that we have done ourselves, we have caused others to do, so directed others to do, or in which we have rejoiced. So in the illustration that you mentioned, we didn't do the killing ourselves, we didn't direct the killing to be done for us or on our behalf, nor did we rejoice in the killing being done. So in terms of what's being referred to here, these are two distinct topics, maybe you could say. They're distinct. So that's one point to make. The second is to then be more specific about the question is eating meat non-virtuous, which is more directly your question, yeah? So, and on eating meat, whether it's non-virtuous or not, there are different views. So some will hold the view that if no one eats meat, no animal will be killed for meat. So therefore, the eater is involved in the process of killing, even if it is particularly indistinct. Yeah, so not at all direct, it's very indirect. If there's no one buying meat, there's no killing of animals for meat. Yeah, if there's no one, but again, I didn't say buying, you said eating. If there's no one eating meat, there'll be no animals killed for meat. So therefore, the person eating the meat, even if they are not involved in the production in any way, they are still involved because supply and demand. Yeah. So that's one view. The other view is, so that would be the view that, yes, eating meat creates some non-virtue. There is the other view that says, even despite what you say, non-virtue is not created by the mere purchase and consumption of the meat, where there is no direction, no direction, kill this animal for me, or encouragement in any way, nor is there any awareness of the completion of the act. So there are the four components for a karmic action to be complete. So there's no motivation for a particular animal to be killed. There's no direct or indirect engagement in the action of killing. So by indirect meaning here, the direction, and there is no awareness of the completion of the act because one is so removed from the act. So the holders of that view would say there is no non-virtue involved with the consumption of meat. Okay, so it's an area of discussion. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much.